The Shadow of Two Hearts. In the quaint coastal town of Velana, where the ocean breeze carried whispers of secrets and the sun set over horizons drenched in gold, Rian found himself entangled in a dilemma as old as time. His life was a portrait of normalcy, married to Liana, a spirited and ambitious woman who turned heads wherever she went. Their marriage was the kind that seemed perfect from the outside, but like an antique mirror, held cracks hidden beneath its polished surface. Rian had met Liana during their university days, their connection born of youthful exuberance and shared dreams. But as years passed, their once burning love became a flickering ember. The laughter they once shared was now replaced with sharp words and icy silences. Yet, Rian had never anticipated how the presence of another could shift the tides so drastically. Not another woman per se, but Liana's mother, Callista. Callista's grace, Callista, was a woman who defied her years. At 55, she carried herself with an elegance that belied her age. Her laughter was infectious, her wit sharp, and her wisdom profound. Unlike Liana, who often seemed preoccupied with her career and social stature, Callista took the time to truly see Rian. In her company, he felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a sense of being understood without the need for explanation. It began innocently enough. Liana often traveled for work, leaving Rian to share quiet dinners with Callista, who had recently moved into their home after a bout of ill health. They would talk late into the night, their conversations flowing like the wine they shared. Callista would recount tales of her youth, of the love she had lost and found, and the lessons she had learned along the way. Rian found himself captivated. Callista wasn't just Liana's mother. She was a woman of depth and complexity, a mirror, reflecting everything he felt he had lost in his marriage. And then, one evening, amidst the soft glow of candlelight and the melodic hum of an old jazz record, the unthinkable happened. Their hands brushed, lingering just a moment too long. The unspoken affair, it was never physical, at least not in the way most would define an affair. But their connection deepened, growing into something they both knew was forbidden. A stolen glance here, a fleeting touch there, and a torrent of unspoken emotions that left them breathless. They were two souls drawn together by an undeniable magnetism, bound by the shared guilt of their unvoiced feelings. Rian's guilt was compounded by the realization that he had never truly understood what love could be until he saw it through Callista's eyes. Callista, for her part, wrestled with her own demons. She loved her daughter dearly, yet she could not deny the pull she felt toward Rian. The inevitable reckoning, their delicate equilibrium was shattered one fateful afternoon. Liana returned home earlier than expected from one of her trips. She found them in the garden, their heads bowed together in an intimate conversation that needed no words to betray its nature. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. What is this? Liana's voice trembled with a mix of fury and disbelief. The confrontation that followed was as raw and chaotic as the storm that rolled in from the sea that evening. Callista, with tears streaming down her face, admitted to the emotional bond she shared with Rian, but swore it had never gone further. Rian, torn between his feelings and the vows he had taken, begged for forgiveness. Lessons in the aftermath. Aftermath was a slow and painful unraveling. Liana, unable to forgive what she saw as the ultimate betrayal, filed for divorce. Callista moved out of their home, retreating to a quiet life far from the scandal that had consumed them all. Rian, left alone, spent years reflecting on the choices he had made and the hearts he had broken. Yet as time passed, healing began. Liana found love again, this time with someone who matched her fiery ambition. Callista, too, found peace, though. She never fully forgave herself for the role she played. And Rian? He learned to live with the shadows of his choices, carrying with him the bittersweet knowledge that sometimes the heart leads us down paths we cannot walk without consequence. Epilogue. The tale of Rian, Liana, and Callista is not one of villains or heroes, but of flawed humans navigating the treacherous waters of love and desire. It reminds us that life is seldom black and white, and in the gray, we find our deepest truths, and often our greatest regrets. The Shadow of Two Hearts. Revenge for Betrayal. The unraveling of Liana and Rian's marriage left scars, but for Liana, the wounds festered into something deeper. Betrayal, she realized, was not just a theft of trust. It was a declaration of war. The humiliation of discovering her husband's emotional affair with her mother ignited a fire in her that refused to be extinguished. She vowed to make both Rian and Callista feel the weight of her wrath. The chessboard is set. Liana was not one to act impulsively. Her revenge would be as calculated as it was devastating. She started with Rian. She knew his career as a budding architect was his pride and joy. Liana still held sway in Velana's upper social circles, and with a few strategic whispers, she ensured his reputation was tarnished. Rumors of financial mismanagement and shoddy work began to spread, drying up his client base. Rian, oblivious to the source of his misfortune, struggled to stay afloat. Meanwhile, Liana kept her distance, watching from the shadows as her plan unfolded. Callista, however, was a different challenge. Despite their estrangement, Liana still felt a twinge of guilt targeting her mother. But the pain of betrayal overpowered her hesitations. She decided to strike where it would hurt Callista most, her cherished social standing. A web of deceit. Liana uncovered an old scandal involving Callista's late husband, one that Callista had worked tirelessly to bury. It was a tale of a failed investment that had left several families destitute, though Callista herself had emerged unscathed. Armed with this knowledge, Liana discreetly leaked the story to the local press, framing it as a new revelation. The fallout was swift. Callista, once the epitome of grace and dignity in Velana, found herself shunned by the very society that had once adored her. Invitations dried up, whispers followed her wherever she went, and her name became synonymous with greed and deception. The return of the Phoenix, but neither Rian nor Callista were as fragile as Liana had assumed. Rian, though battered, began to rebuild his career outside of Velana, taking on small projects in neighboring towns. He used the time to reflect on his mistakes, determined to emerge stronger. Meanwhile, Callista, though devastated by the public shaming, found solace in the quiet support of a small group of loyal friends who believed in her innocence. Months turned into years, and Liana's revenge, though satisfying at first, began to weigh on her. The emptiness it left was not the victory she had imagined. She had won the battle, but at the cost of her peace. The final reckoning one evening, a letter arrived at Liana's doorstep. It bore no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably Callista's. Inside was a simple note. "I forgave myself. When will you?" The words hit Liana like a tidal wave. She realized that her vengeance had chained her to the very pain she sought to escape. For the first time, she allowed herself to grieve, not just for the betrayal, but for the love and trust that had once defined her relationships. A new beginning. Liana reached out to both Rian and Callista, seeking a truce, if not reconciliation. Though the wounds were still raw, time had softened the edges of their anger. They met at a quiet cafe overlooking the sea, the same sea that had witnessed the storm of their lives. Words were spoken, tears were shed, and though the past could not be undone, they found a fragile peace in moving forward. Epilogue. Revenge, they realized, was a double-edged sword, cutting both ways. In the end, it was not vengeance, but forgiveness that set them free. Their story became a cautionary tale. In Velana, a reminder that love, betrayal, and redemption are threads in the same tapestry, each inseparable from the others. The shadow of two hearts. The inferno of revenge. Liana's attempts to bury her anger with forgiveness were short-lived. The wounds of betrayal had cut too deeply, and the bitterness she thought she had released resurfaced like a vengeful ghost. This time, there would be no half measures. If betrayal was a fire, then her revenge would be an inferno that consumed everything in its path. A new strategy. Liana began anew, crafting a scheme so intricate that neither Rian nor Callista would see it coming. She realized that their guilt had made them predictable. They sought redemption, forgiveness, and closure. Liana would use their vulnerabilities as weapons. Her first target was Rian. Knowing he had begun to rebuild his life as an architect, she posed as a wealthy investor under a false identity, hiring him for a high-profile project in a nearby city. It was the chance of a lifetime for Rian, a sprawling hotel that would put his name back on the map. Liana, disguised behind her fabricated persona, lavished him with praise and encouragement, gaining his trust. The collapse months into the project, just as Rian had poured his resources and reputation into the venture, Liana pulled the rug out from under him. She exposed her identity in a dramatic confrontation at the construction site, accusing him of incompetence and breach of contract. She filed a lawsuit that froze his accounts, leaving him financially crippled and humiliated in the eyes of his peers. Rian, already reeling from his past mistakes, now found himself on the brink of ruin. Turning the blade to Callista, still ostracized by society due to Liana's earlier machinations, had retreated into a quiet life, teaching art to children in her modest countryside home. Liana's revenge against her mother was more personal and cruel. She befriended a local journalist and fed him intimate details of her family's darkest moments, framing Callista as a manipulative matriarch who had engineered the affair to sabotage her daughter's marriage. The exposé spread like wildfire, reigniting the scandal and casting Callista as the villain in the court of public opinion. Anonymous letters filled with cruel taunts began arriving at her door. The children she taught were withdrawn from her classes, and her once peaceful retreat became a prison of isolation. The breaking point, Rian and Callista, broken and desperate, finally came together, not out of love, but out of necessity. They realized that Liana's vengeance had made them allies in suffering. In their shared anguish, they began to piece together the extent of her schemes. What had once been guilt and shame transformed into a simmering resolve to fight back. Revenges. Liana's triumph was short-lived. Her obsession with revenge had consumed her life, leaving her lonely and mistrustful. Her once thriving career began to falter as her manipulative tactics seeped into her professional relationships. The same ruthlessness that had fueled her vendetta became her undoing, alienating allies and ruining opportunities. One evening, Liana returned home to find her house eerily quiet. On her dining table lay a single note, penned in Rian's hand. "We're done playing your game. Revenge isn't justice. It's a poison. And now, it's yours to drink alone." Beside the note was a stack of legal documents. Rian and Callista had taken joint legal action against her for defamation, fraud, and harassment. The case attracted media attention, and the once dignified Liana found herself at the center of a scandal of her own making. The Inferno's ashes by the time the legal battles concluded. All three lives were left in ruins. Rian relocated to a distant city, leaving behind the profession he had once loved. Callista disappeared from public view entirely, retreating into anonymity. And Lyanna, stripped of her wealth and status, was left to reckon with the emptiness her revenge had wrought. Years later, in the quiet stillness of her modest apartment, Lyanna wrote a memoir titled Ashes of the Heart. In it, she chronicled the rise and fall of her vengeance, offering a cautionary tale about the destructive power of betrayal and the even greater destruction of unchecked revenge. The memoir became a bestseller, its final words resonating with readers across the world. In the end, I destroyed everything I sought to protect. Betrayal may ignite the fire, but revenge is the wind that spreads it. Be careful what you burn, for the flames spare no one, not even yourself. Epilogue. The story of Lyanna, Rian, and Callista became legend in Velana, a reminder of how easily love and trust can be consumed by the flames of anger. Though their lives were forever altered, their tale lived on, a testament to the dual-edged sword of betrayal and revenge, the shadow of two hearts, the final act of vengeance. Lyanna's memoir, Ashes of the Heart, was meant to be her swan song, a final painful catharsis for all that had transpired. Yet as the world read her words and marveled at her honesty, one person saw the book not as closure, but as an opportunity: Rian. Years had passed since Lyanna's schemes had left their lives in tatters, but for Rian, the pain was still raw. He had lost his career, his reputation, and his dreams. While Lyanna had managed to find a new life as an author, Rian's existence was one of quiet resentment. And so as he read her memoir, he hatched a plan, a revenge that would strike not with fire, but with precision. The Rian returned to Velana under the guise of rebuilding his life. He presented himself as a changed man, seeking reconciliation and forgiveness. He reached out to Lyanna through a mutual acquaintance, expressing admiration for her book and requesting a meeting to discuss the possibility of adapting it into a film. Flattered and curious, Lyanna agreed. They met at a bustling cafe near the sea, the same place where they had once tried to mend their fractured ties. Rian, polished and charming, seemed like a man reborn. He praised her work, calling it a masterpiece of raw emotion and unflinching honesty. Lyanna, ever perceptive, was cautious. But Rian played his part masterfully, subtly planting the seeds of trust. Over the following months, they began to meet regularly, ostensibly to discuss the film adaptation. Each meeting pulled Lyanna deeper into his web. The Trap is set. Rian proposed a grand vision for the adaptation, a sweeping cinematic portrayal of her life that would redeem her in the eyes of those who still judged her harshly. He promised to handle the production himself, using his newfound connections in the film industry. Unbeknownst to Lyanna, Rian had no such connections. Instead, he began weaving a narrative that mirrored their past, one of trust, betrayal, and calculated manipulation. He subtly planted doubts in the minds of her publishers and her new circle of friends, casting her as difficult to work with and emotionally unstable. As the project progressed, Lyanna found herself increasingly isolated. Meetings were canceled, contracts were delayed, and whispers of her unreliability began to circulate. She reached out to Rian for support, and he was always there, ready to console her, deepening her dependence on him. The execution, the final act of Rian's revenge, came during the highly anticipated launch event for the film adaptation. The Yade event was a spectacle, with media, critics, and industry elites in attendance. As Lyanna stood before the crowd preparing to give a speech, Rian unveiled his masterpiece, a documentary he had secretly been working on. The documentary, titled The Queen of Betrayal, was a scathing exposé of Lyanna's life, complete with interviews, leaked recordings, and dramatizations of her schemes against him and Callista. It painted her not as a victim of betrayal, but as a cold, calculating villain who had destroyed lives in her quest for revenge. The audience watched in stunned silence as Liana's darkest moments played out on the screen. By the time the lights came back on, her career, reputation, and carefully rebuilt life lay in ruins. The fallout Ryan's revenge was complete, but it came at a cost. The backlash from the documentary divided the public. Some saw him as a hero exposing the truth, while others condemned him for his vindictiveness. Callista, watching from afar, reached out to Ryan, urging him to let go of his anger and move on. But Ryan, though victorious, found no satisfaction in his triumph. Liana disappeared from the public eye after the event. Some said she moved to a remote village, while others claimed she was living under a new identity. The truth remained a mystery, but her story became a cautionary tale once more, this time for the dangers of unchecked ambition and the cyclical nature of vengeance. Epilogue. A cycle. Unbroken. Years later, Ryan sat by the sea, watching the waves crash against the shore. He realized that revenge, like betrayal, was a chain, binding him to the past, dragging him deeper into the shadows. He had won, but in the process, he had lost himself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ryan penned his own memoir, a final act of contrition. Its title, Chains of Fire, A Life Consumed by Revenge. In its pages, he laid bare the futility of his actions and the emptiness they had left behind, hoping to break the cycle once and for all. And so, the story of Ryan, Liana, and Callista ended as it began, not with triumph or peace, but with a haunting reminder that in the pursuit of revenge, no one truly wins. The Shadow of Two Hearts, The Forbidden Flame. When Liana discovered the bond between her husband, Ryan, and her mother, Callista, the betrayal tore through her like a storm. She filed for divorce, severing ties with both of them, but the emotional wreckage of their shared sin lingered. The story could have ended there, a tale of broken trust and fractured family bonds. But life has a way of twisting even the most shattered paths into new shapes. The aftermath. Ryan, having lost both his marriage and the respect of the community, left Velana. He relocated to a distant city, seeking anonymity and a fresh start. Despite his shame, the memory of Callista lingered in his mind, not as a fleeting infatuation, but as something deeper, more complex. It was not love, but a bond born of shared pain and understanding. Callista, too, was left to grapple with the consequences of her actions. The scandal had cast her as a pariah, even among her closest friends. She retreated to a small seaside cottage, far from prying eyes. Alone with her guilt, she found solace in art, pouring her emotions onto canvas in vivid strokes of color. An unexpected reunion years passed. By chance, or perhaps fate, Ryan and Callista's paths crossed again at an art gallery in a city far from Velana. Callista's paintings had gained quiet acclaim, and Ryan, unaware of her success, had stumbled upon her exhibition. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The weight of their shared past hung heavy between them, but so too did a strange sense of relief. Here, in this new context, they were no longer husband and mother-in-law, no longer bound by the roles that had once defined and destroyed them. "I didn't expect to see you here," Callista said softly, her voice tinged with both apprehension and curiosity. "I didn't expect to find you here," Ryan replied, his tone equally cautious. Rebuilding connection. Their initial conversation was stilted, but as the evening progressed, the walls between them began to crumble. They spoke not of the scandal that had defined their past, but of their individual journeys since. Ryan shared how he had rebuilt his career and found peace in small, meaningful projects. Callista spoke of her art and the catharsis it had brought her. Their connection, once forbidden and fraught with guilt, began to shift into something else, a companionship born of understanding and the mutual need to heal. A new beginning? As weeks turned into months, Rian and Callista grew closer, though. They were careful to keep their relationship discreet. They both knew the world would never understand, and they were acutely aware of the pain they had caused Liana. Yet, in each other, they found a rare kind of solace, a chance to rewrite the narrative of their lives, not as a scandalous love story, but as a tale of redemption and growth. They supported each other's pursuits. Rian helped Callista organize her first international exhibition, while Callista encouraged Rian to expand his architectural practice. Their bond was not free of challenges. Whispers of their connection reached Liana, who, despite her own attempts to move on, found herself unable to forgive. Liana's revenge. When Liana learned of their rekindled connection, her old wounds flared anew. She viewed their relationship as a betrayal of her pain, a dismissal of the suffering they had caused. In her mind, they had stolen her happiness and were now attempting to build something beautiful from the ruins they had created. Liana, now a successful entrepreneur, used her influence to tarnish their reputations once more. Anonymous accusations and rumors began to surface in the art and architecture worlds, threatening to undo everything Rian and Callista had worked to rebuild. The final confrontation. Unable to endure the strain, Rian and Callista reached out to Liana, requesting a meeting. They met in a quiet park, where the tension between them was palpable. "You've had your second chance," Liana spat, her voice trembling with anger. "What gives you the right to find happiness after what you did to me?" Rian and Callista, though guilty, stood their ground. "We never set out to hurt you, Liana," Rian said. "But we can't undo the past. We can only try to move forward." Callista added, her voice soft but firm. "I will never forgive myself for what I did. But holding on to hate will only keep us all trapped." Liana's expression hardened, but a glimmer of hesitation flickered in her eyes. "I don't know if I can ever forgive either of you, but maybe it's time I let go of the past, for my own sake." Epilogue. In the years that followed, Liana chose to focus on her own happiness, distancing herself from both Rian and Callista. While forgiveness never fully came, neither did the obsessive anger that had once consumed her. Rian and Callista, though never entirely free from the shadows of their past, continued to build a quiet life together. The shadow of two hearts. The final reckoning. Liana sat in the dim light of her apartment, staring at the photograph of her once perfect family. The betrayal had shattered that illusion, leaving behind only jagged shards of anger and resentment. Though she had exacted revenge on Rian and Callista, the satisfaction was fleeting. The emptiness inside her lingered, and the echoes of her actions continued to ripple through their lives. But the story was far from over. A new player in the game. Unbeknownst to Liana, her revenge had awakened a new adversary, Sophia, Callista's estranged younger sister. Sophia had always been envious of Callista's success and grace, and the scandal with Rian provided her an opportunity to step into the fray. She reached out to Liana under the guise of solidarity, feigning sympathy for the betrayal Liana had endured. "You deserve justice," Sophia said, her voice dripping with faux sincerity, "and I can help you ensure they never find happiness again." At first, Liana was skeptical. She had become wary of trusting anyone. But Sophia's words planted a seed in her mind. The idea of completely dismantling Rian and Callista's lives tempted her, even as a small part of her hesitated. Was there any peace to be found in endless vengeance? The web titan Sophia began orchestrating a campaign of subtle sabotage against Rian and Callista. She used her connections to spread rumors, sabotaged Callista's art exhibitions, and anonymously accused Rian of unethical business practices. Liana, though initially hesitant, found herself drawn into Sophia's schemes. The satisfaction of seeing her betrayers suffer was intoxicating, and with Sophia by her side, it felt easier to justify. But Sophia's true motives soon became clear. She wasn't helping Liana out of compassion. She was using her to destroy Callista, her lifelong rival. As Sophia's actions grew bolder and more reckless, Liana began to feel uneasy. Revenge had consumed her once, and she wasn't sure she could bear the weight of it again. A revelation. One night, Liana stumbled upon a journal Sophia had left behind. In it were detailed plans not only to ruin Callista, but also to turn public. Opinion against Liana if she became inconvenient. The betrayal hit Liana like a thunderbolt. She realized she had become a pawn in someone else's game, a game that threatened to destroy not just Rion and Callista, but herself as well. For the first time, Liana saw the full picture. Revenge had not only alienated her from those who had wronged her, but had also blinded her to the collateral damage she had caused. Determined to end the cycle, Liana devised a plan, not for vengeance, but for redemption. The final confrontation. Liana confronted Sophia at an elegant charity gala where both Rion and Callista were in attendance. Under the guise of a public apology, Liana revealed Sophia's schemes to the crowd. She spoke candidly about her own role in the chaos, taking responsibility for her actions while exposing Sophia's manipulations. "I let my pain consume me," Liana said, her voice trembling, but resolute. "But I won't let it define me anymore. And I won't let someone else use my anger as a weapon." Sophia, caught off guard, attempted to deny the allegations, but the evidence was irrefutable. As the room turned against her, she fled, her reputation in shambles. A fragile peace. In the aftermath, Liana extended an olive branch to Rion and Callista. While forgiveness was still a distant possibility, she expressed her desire to move on, to let go of the bitterness that had consumed her. "I can't change what happened," she told them, "but I can choose what happens next." Rion and Callista, though wary, accepted her gesture. They too had been scarred by the cycle of betrayal and revenge, and the possibility of closure offered a glimmer of hope. Epilogue. The price of revenge, Liana sold her apartment in Villana and moved to a quiet coastal town where she began writing a new book, not a memoir, but a novel about healing and second chances. Rion and Callista, having weathered the storm, rebuilt their lives with humility, finding solace in each other's company. The story of their tangled lives became a cautionary tale in Villana, a reminder of how betrayal and revenge can spiral out of control, leaving destruction in their wake. In the end, they learned that true strength lay not in vengeance, but in the courage to face the pain, let go of the past, and seek a brighter future. And so, the shadow of two hearts began to fade, replaced by the promise of a new dawn. The shadow of two hearts, the endless game. As Liana tried to rebuild her life after exposing Sophia's schemes, she believed she had finally broken free from the chains of revenge. But the scars of betrayal run deep, and the consequences of her actions rippled outward, setting new forces into motion. What she didn't realize was that her story was far from over. Revenge, like a snake, often circles back to bite its own tail. A new storm brews. Months after Liana left Villana for the peace of the coastal town, Rion and Callista began to feel the weight of their past catching up with them. While they had attempted to repair their lives, whispers of their scandal had reached further than they imagined. A journalist, enamored with the salacious details of their story, decided to make it his next big exposé. The article, titled "The Betrayers Among Us," painted a vivid and damning picture of their affair, dragging their names through the mud once more. It reignited public outrage, undoing any progress they had made toward redemption. Worse, the peace. hinted at a new betrayal. An anonymous source alleged that Callista had been unfaithful to Rian with yet another man. Rian, already emotionally frayed, began to spiral. Doubts crept into his mind, poisoning what little trust remained between him and Callista. Callista, feeling cornered, lashed out in defense. Their once fragile unity began to crack. Liana's reluctant return. Liana, far from the chaos, heard of the exposé through a friend. Though she had vowed to leave the past behind, she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She had set these events in motion, after all. Against her better judgment, she reached out to Rian and Callista. "I heard about the article," she said when Rian picked up the phone. "I want to help." Rian's laughter was bitter. "Help? After everything you've done? What could you possibly offer us?" "Closure," Liana said firmly, "for all of us." Despite their skepticism, Rian and Callista agreed to meet Liana in the same cafe where their lives had once collided, in flames. The air was tense, but Liana's calm demeanor disarmed them. "We've all been through hell," she began, "but if we keep tearing each other apart, none of us will ever heal. That article, it's not just about you. It's about all of us. And I think I know who leaked it." The hidden puppet master Liana's instincts pointed her back to Sophia. Though Sophia had been publicly disgraced, her thirst for revenge hadn't waned. She had been the journalist's anonymous source, feeding him details and fabricating others to keep the scandal alive. For Sophia, it wasn't just about ruining Callista. It was about ensuring no one involved in the betrayal found peace. The trio, Liana, Rian, and Callista, reluctantly united to confront Sophia. They found her in a crumbling estate on the outskirts of Velana, her once proud demeanor now a shadow of its former self. "You think you can walk away from this unscathed?" Sophia sneered as they confronted her. "None of you deserve happiness. You ruined each other, and you deserve to live in the ruins." The final choice. Sophia's words struck a chord with all three. She wasn't entirely wrong. Each of them had played a part in the web of lies and betrayal that had consumed their lives. But Liana, for the first time, saw the truth clearly. The cycle had to end. "We can keep fighting," Liana said, her voice steady. "Or we can stop, right here, right now. We don't have to forgive each other, but we can choose to let go." Sophia laughed bitterly. "And what would that achieve? Redemption? Peace? You're all broken beyond repair." "Maybe," Rian said, surprising both women. "But it's better than letting you keep pulling the strings." Callista, too, spoke up. "We're not asking for forgiveness, Sophia. But you're as much a prisoner of this as we are. Let it go." Sophia hesitated, her defiance faltering. For a moment, the weight of her anger seemed to crush her. Finally, she slumped into a chair, her face pale. "Fine," she muttered, "but don't think this makes any of you saints." A fragile truce. With Sophia's vendetta quelled, Liana, Rian, and Callista parted ways once more. They didn't exchange promises of friendship or reconciliation, but there was an unspoken agreement to leave the past where it belonged. Liana returned to her coastal retreat, channeling her experiences into a new book. This time, not a tale of revenge, but of resilience. Rian and Callista chose to leave Velana behind, settling in a quiet village where they could attempt to rebuild their lives away from prying eyes. Epilogue. The shadow fades. The story of their tangled lives became a footnote in the gossip columns, and an obscure case study in betrayal and forgiveness. Over time, the wounds began to heal, though scars remained as reminders of the choices they had made. For Liana, the greatest lesson was this: revenge might bring satisfaction, but it can never undo the pain. Beneath the surface, the price of secrets. David always prided himself on his ability to read people. As a corporate strategist, it was his job to anticipate hidden agendas and spot weaknesses. But nothing could have prepared him for the betrayal lurking in his own home. His wife, Clara, the woman he had loved and trusted for nearly a decade, had been hiding a devastating secret. The unfolding suspicion. It started subtly, a missed dinner here, an unusual late-night text there. Clara, once attentive and warm, seemed distracted. David tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was work stress, or perhaps she was just overwhelmed with the demands of managing their household. Yet a small, nagging voice in the back of his mind urged him to look deeper. One evening, while Clara was in the shower, David noticed her phone buzzing repeatedly on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a name he didn't recognize. Ethan. His stomach tightened. Curiosity, mixed with dread, led him to pick up the phone. The messages were innocuous enough at first glance, jokes, casual remarks about work. But as he scrolled further, the tone shifted. Words became intimate, laced with a familiarity that stung like salt in an open wound. Confrontation and denial. David's hands shook as he placed the phone back on the counter. He decided to confront Clara that night. When she stepped out of the bathroom, her face flushed from the heat of the shower, he wasted no time. "Who's Ethan?" he asked, his voice steady but cold. Clara froze, her towel slipping slightly from her shoulder. "Ethan," she repeated, feigning confusion. "Just a colleague. Why?" "Don't lie to me, Clara," David said, his voice rising. "I saw the messages. Tell me the truth." Her denial was immediate and adamant. "You're overreacting. He's just a friend. There's nothing going on." But her defensiveness only deepened David's suspicions. The truth unravels, unable. To shake his doubts, David hired a private investigator to uncover the truth. Within a week, he had his answer. Clara and Ethan had been meeting regularly at a boutique hotel on the outskirts of the city. The investigator provided photos, timestamps, and even receipts, irrefutable evidence of the affair. When David confronted her again, this time with the evidence in hand, Clara broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she sobbed. "I was lonely, David. You've been so distant lately, always working, always distracted. I felt invisible." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been distant, buried in his career, but did that justify her betrayal? The aftermath. David moved out of their home the next day, leaving Clara alone to grapple with her guilt. Friends and family quickly became aware of the situation, and opinions were divided. Some sided with David, condemning Clara's actions, while others argued that David's emotional neglect had played a role. Clara reached out multiple times, begging for a chance to make things right. She enrolled in therapy, both individually and as a couple, hoping to mend the damage. David, however, remained conflicted. Could he ever trust her again? Could they rebuild something from the ashes of their broken marriage? A crossroads months passed, and David found himself at a crossroads. Clara had shown genuine remorse and was making an effort to change, but the scars of her betrayal were still raw. Meanwhile, he had started attending therapy himself, confronting his own shortcomings and the ways he had contributed to the distance in their marriage. One evening, as he sat alone in his new apartment, David received a text from Clara. It was a simple message. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I hope you find peace, whether it's with me or without me." The choice. David knew he had a choice to make, to either let go of the past and try to rebuild with Clara, or to walk away and start anew. Both paths were fraught with uncertainty, but one thing was clear. He couldn't continue living in limbo. Standing at his apartment window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, David realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing Clara's actions. It was about freeing himself from the bitterness that threatened to consume him. Epilogue. A fragile reconciliation. David chose to meet Clara at a small cafe where they had shared countless happy moments in the early days of their relationship. Their conversation was honest, raw, and painful. They acknowledged their mistakes and the ways they had hurt each other. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was a necessary one. In the end, they decided to give their marriage one last chance, not out of obligation, but because they both believed in the possibility of redemption. They knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but they were willing to try. The Spiral of Shadows. The final chapter. After Sophia's exposure and the uneasy truce between Liana, Rian, and Callista, a fragile peace seemed to settle. Yet in the quiet moments of their lives, the scars of betrayal still burned. Revenge may have run its course, but its echoes lingered, refusing to let go. The ghost of retribution. Liana had moved to a coastal retreat to distance herself from the chaos. She spent her days writing and trying to make sense of everything that had transpired. But one rainy evening, a package arrived at her doorstep, a thick envelope without a return address. Inside was a series of photos, candid shots of her walking along the beach, dining at local cafes, and sitting on her porch. The message was clear. Someone was watching. At first, Liana dismissed it as a harmless prank. But when she began receiving anonymous texts referencing private details of her life, fear crept in. Was it Sophia seeking revenge for her downfall? Or someone else tangled in the web of her past? Rian's collapse. Meanwhile, Rian struggled to rebuild his business, which had been marred by scandal. Investors pulled out, and his reputation in Vellana was in tatters. One night, as he sat alone in his empty office, he received a chilling email, a video clip of him arguing with Callista during one of their lowest moments, paired with the message, "What's done in the dark always comes to light." Rian knew it wasn't just about exposing him, it was about breaking him. He suspected Sophia, but part of him feared it could be Liana. After all, hadn't she proven how far she was willing to go for revenge? Callista's new ally. Callista, too, was not spared. Her art gallery was vandalized one night with graffiti scrawled across the walls, "Fraudulent Heart." Desperate to protect what little she had left, she turned to an unlikely ally, a journalist, named Daniel, who had once written about her scandal. "I want to tell my side of the story," she told him. "All of it." But Daniel had his own agenda. He promised Callista a chance at redemption, but behind his professional demeanor, he harbored a hidden connection to one of the many people hurt by her affair with Rian. His interest wasn't just in her story. It was in her downfall. A reunion. Of necessity. When Liana, Rian, and Callista began receiving simultaneous threats, cryptic messages, doctored videos, and public humiliation, they realized they were all being targeted by the same unknown force. With no one else to turn to, they reluctantly came together. "I thought we were done with this," Callista said bitterly as they sat in a dimly lit cafe. "So did I," Rian replied. "But whoever this is, they're not after revenge. They want to destroy us." Liana, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "We have to find out who's behind this, and we have to stop them." The mastermind revealed. Their investigation led them to someone they had overlooked, Ethan, a former employee of Rian's company and one of Sophia's old accomplices. Ethan had quietly orchestrated the threats, fueled by his own vendetta. Years. Rian's business decisions had cost Ethan his career, and Callista's art gallery had rejected his work, dismissing it as unpolished. Liana, though less directly involved, was a convenient target, an enemy of his ally, Sophia. Ethan had bided his time, waiting for the moment when all three were vulnerable. Using his tech skills and connections, he created a campaign of psychological, Warfare designed to dismantle their lives piece by piece. The final confrontation. The trio confronted Ethan in a derelict warehouse where he had set up his operations. He greeted them with a smirk. "I wanted you to feel what I felt. Powerless, humiliated, broken." "You've made your point," Liana said, her voice steady despite her fear. "But this isn't justice. It's just more pain." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Justice? There's no such thing. There's only balance, and now the scales are tipping." A tense standoff ensued. Ethan revealed he had one last move, a damning exposé about all three of them, ready to be published. But in his arrogance, he had left his vulnerabilities exposed. Liana used her knowledge of his methods to disarm him, destroying his backup, files, and severing his connection to his network. Defeated, Ethan lashed out verbally, but his words fell on deaf ears. They left him behind, his power stripped away. A fragile closure. With Ethan neutralized, Liana, Rian, and Callista faced the aftermath of their shared nightmare. Though they had worked together to stop him, their wounds were far from healed. "I don't know if we'll ever move on from this," Callista admitted as they parted ways. "Maybe we're not supposed to," Liana replied. "Maybe we just learn to live with it." For the first time, there was no anger or bitterness between them, only an understanding of the human fragility that had brought them to this point. The final reckoning, shadows of the past. The fragile truce between Liana, Rian, and Callista had been an uneasy one. Though Ethan's schemes had been unraveled and his campaign of terror dismantled, the scars of betrayal still marked their lives. Time had passed, but time alone wasn't enough to heal the deep wounds inflicted by love, lies, and revenge. Each of them had tried to move forward in their own way, but the shadow of their shared past was never far behind. A sudden invitation. It was a rainy evening when Liana received an unexpected invitation. The letter, written in elegant cursive, was unsigned but carried a message that chilled her to the bone. "Join me at the old estate. We have unfinished business." The address led her to an abandoned manor outside Villana, a place long forgotten, yet eerily tied to her memories of Sophia. Against her better judgment, Liana decided to go. If there was anything left to uncover, she needed to face it. Rian and Callista received similar messages, and like Liana, they couldn't resist the pull of curiosity mixed with dread. Each of them arrived separately, their hearts heavy with suspicion. The gathering. The manor was in ruins, its grand facade faded and crumbling. The once opulent interiors were now cloaked in dust and decay. A single table stood in the center of the main hall, illuminated by the flicker of an old chandelier. 3 seats were set, and on the table lay a single black envelope. Liana, Rian, and Callista exchanged wary glances before Liana opened the envelope. Inside was a note. "Your past is the key to your future. Only together can you find the answers you seek." Before they could decipher the message, the sound of a door creaking open echoed through the hall. From the shadows emerged a figure they had never seen before, a man with sharp features and a calm, calculating demeanor. He introduced himself as Adrian, Sophia's estranged brother. Sophia's final move. Adrian explained that Sophia, despite her downfall, had left behind a contingency plan, a final act of vengeance aimed at ensuring that none of them could escape their past. She had entrusted Adrian with a collection of damning evidence and secrets that could destroy each of them in ways they hadn't yet imagined. "She wanted me to ruin you," Adrian said, his voice steady, "to expose every dark corner of your lives. But I'm not my sister. I have no desire to play her games." "Then why bring us here?" Rian asked, his tone edged with suspicion. "To give you a choice," Adrian replied. "Destroy this together and bury the past for good, or let it consume you." The temptation of truth. Adrian placed a locked box on the table. Inside, he claimed, were documents, recordings, and photographs that detailed every indiscretion, every betrayal, and every weakness they had tried to hide. For a moment, none of them spoke. The weight of the decision hung heavy, in the air. To destroy the box would mean letting go of the opportunity to fully understand Sophia's final machinations. But to open it would mean reliving their darkest moments and risking new wounds. Liana was the first to speak. "We've already lost so much. What good will it do to dredge up more pain?" Callista, however, wasn't so sure. What if there's something in there we need to know? What if it's not just about her revenge? Ryan, torn between their arguments, finally said, "Whatever's in that box doesn't define us anymore. It's just a tool, like everything. Sophia ever used to hurt us. The real question is whether we let her win." The choice. After a long silence, they made their decision. Together, they carried the box outside to the overgrown garden. Under the stormy sky, they set it alight. The fire crackled and hissed, consuming Sophia's legacy of vengeance. As the flames rose, so too did a sense of catharsis. Adrian watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. "She wanted you to burn," he said quietly. "But maybe this is what she needed, to see you rise instead." The aftermath. In the days that followed, Liana, Ryan, and Callista felt a strange sense of relief. The act of destroying the box had been symbolic, a way of reclaiming power from Sophia's shadow. For the first time in years, they began to feel a sense of closure. Liana channeled her energy into writing again, penning a memoir that explored the depths of human emotion and the resilience of the soul. Ryan, humbled by his experiences, dedicated himself to mentoring young entrepreneurs, hoping to guide others away from the mistakes he had made. Callista returned to her art, using her work to express the pain and growth she had endured. Epilogue. The light beyond the shadows. Years later, they found themselves in the same city but leading separate lives. Though they rarely spoke, there was an unspoken bond between them, a shared understanding that they had survived something few could comprehend. Shadows of the past. The final reckoning. The air in Velana had shifted after the destruction of Sophia's final weapon, the box filled with all the secrets she had meticulously curated to destroy them. Yet, while the fire had consumed the physical remnants of her wrath, it hadn't fully extinguished the lingering shadows she had cast over Liana, Ryan, and Callista. They were free, but they were not untouched. The city, a landscape of glass towers and cracked dreams, seemed unchanged. But for those who had survived the hell of betrayal, it felt different. The past had been buried, but not erased. Liana's quiet return months had passed since the burning of the box, and Liana had found solace in her new life. She moved into a small, sunlit apartment overlooking the sea, far from the echoes of her previous life. Her writing flourished, but beneath the calm surface, the question still haunted her. Was that enough? It was a question that had been creeping into her thoughts at odd hours. Was she truly free of her past? Or had she simply buried it under the weight of time and distance? It was late one evening when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Her fingers hovered over the screen, hesitation gripping her chest. But the curiosity was too much. She opened the message. "You think the past is gone, but it's still watching you. You've made your choices, but they aren't the end. Not yet." The words were simple, yet the coldness in them sent a shiver through her body. It was a warning, and she knew deep down that it was not from Sophia. This was something new, something darker. Ryan's struggle. Meanwhile, Ryan had found a semblance of peace. His company, though no longer the powerhouse it once was slowly recovering. He had rebuilt his life around the lessons he had learned from his mistakes. But even as he projected strength to the world, there were moments when his own reflection in the mirror was a stranger. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Rian sat alone in his office. The quiet hum of the city outside was his only company, and his mind was heavy with the weight of past decisions. That's when his phone rang, an unknown number again. He answered it immediately. "You think you've earned redemption, Rian? You've fooled yourself. Everything you've built can still crumble. You're not free of what you've done. It's still out there, waiting." The voice on the other end was distorted, as if the person were trying to mask their identity. Rian's heart raced. The message was unmistakable. Someone was coming for him. Callista's silence. Callista had tried to move forward. She returned to her art, creating pieces that spoke of the pain and beauty she had discovered in the wreckage of her life. Yet there was a hollow space in her heart, an emptiness she couldn't ignore. She had been running from her past for so long, but the shadows of betrayal still haunted her. Her phone, too, buzzed that night. She stared at the screen. The message was the same as Rian's and Liana's. "It's not over. None of you are safe. You've left a trail of destruction, and it will follow you until there's nothing left." For a long moment, Callista sat in silence. Her hand shook as she gripped the phone, her mind racing. She knew this wasn't a mere prank. This was someone who knew everything, the truth, the lies, the pain. This was someone who wanted to finish what Sophia had started. The final game days passed, and the three of them could no longer ignore the truth. Their past wasn't done with them. Whoever was behind these messages had a deep understanding of their lives, and they were playing a game with them. Rian, and Callista reluctantly agreed to meet, each one carrying the weight of their own fears. The location was the same, an old, abandoned building at the edge of the city where they had once gathered to face their own demons. This time it felt different. The air was thick with tension, and the knowledge that this was no longer about revenge. It was about survival. As they entered the building, they were met by Adrian, the man who had once offered them a choice. But now, his expression was unreadable. "Sophia's dead," he said. "But the people she trusted, they're still out there, and they want something from you." "Who are they?" Rian demanded. "They were her allies, those who believed her vision of revenge was just," Adrian replied. "And they want to finish what she started. They believe you all owe them something." The true price. Adrian led them deeper into the building where a large screen flickered to life. On it were images of their lives, images that only someone who knew them intimately could have captured. Each of them had been followed, watched, and studied. And now, their every move would be exposed once more. "You thought Sophia was the mastermind," Adrian continued. "But the truth is, she was only a pawn in a much larger game, a game that's far from over. The spiral of deceit. The return of betrayal." Life had settled into a precarious calm after the dust had seemingly settled from the previous betrayals. Liana, Rian, and Callista had tried to move on from the chaos, each of them seeking healing, in different ways. Yet, as time had shown, the past is never as easily buried as one might hope. In the quiet spaces between their attempts to rebuild their lives, new cracks had begun to appear. Unseen, but always there. The cracks beneath the surface. Liana had grown distant, not physically, but emotionally. She had left behind her former life, the affair with Rian, the pain of betrayal, and the fallout of her decision to trust Callista. But she had never fully healed. The scars of the past had faded into a dull ache, but they were still present, gnawing at the edges of her consciousness. She had fallen back into a routine: work, solitary walks along the beach, and evenings spent with a book. She had tried dating again, but nothing felt right. Every man who came into her life seemed to remind her of what she had lost, and, more importantly, what she had betrayed. Then, one evening, as she poured herself a glass of wine and stared out at the ocean, her phone buzzed. The number was familiar, though she hadn't heard from it in years. It was Rian. "We need to talk." Rian's struggles. Rian had never truly recovered from the wreckage of his past. He had rebuilt his business, found a new sense of purpose, in helping others rise from the ashes, but there was a darkness lurking inside him, a shadow that never quite disappeared. He had tried to move on, to find peace with the choices he had made, but despite his efforts, Liana was always in his mind. She had been the one thing he could never truly have: his past, his temptation, and his unfulfilled desire. Rian's message to her had been impulsive. The weight of his emotions had caught up with him one evening as he stood alone in his office, staring at the city that had once been his empire. His thoughts circled back to the woman who had haunted him through it all. Liana. The fateful reunion. When Liana arrived at Rian's apartment, she was surprised by the intensity of her own emotions. She hadn't thought she would feel anything, but as soon as she stepped through the door, memories flooded her senses. Of their time together, of the betrayal, of the love that had once been. "Liana," Rian greeted her, his voice heavy, with unspoken words. He had changed, but the tension between them was still palpable, a magnet pulling them towards something they both feared. "What's this about, Rian?" Liana asked, her voice colder than she intended. "I can't stop thinking about what we had," he confessed, "and I'm not sure I can let go of the past." Liana felt her heart race. Not again, she thought. They had already been through this once. The lies, the betrayal, the broken trust. How could they ever undo the damage they had caused each other? "Rian, we've been through this before. We can't just pretend it didn't happen. But I don't think I can move on without addressing it, without facing it," he replied, his voice raw. Liana stood still, fighting the wave of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. There was a part of her that had always longed for this moment, for the closure she never received. And yet she knew it was dangerous. She knew how easily this could spiral out of control again. The crossroads of temptation. Despite her resolve to walk away, the pull of Rian's presence, the gravity of their shared history was undeniable. Their eyes met, hauntingly familiar, like two souls that had once been intertwined in a web of desire and regret. "I don't know what I want anymore," Liana whispered. "I've tried to forget, but the past keeps coming back." Rian moved closer, his voice a whisper against her ear. "Maybe we don't need to forget. Maybe we just need to acknowledge it." Liana closed her eyes, torn between the impulse to walk away and the burning desire that had always simmered beneath the surface. The years of trying to outrun the pain, the betrayal, seemed to melt away as she stood there, heart pounding. Before, she could stop herself. She kissed him, softly, urgently, as though all the years of pain, confusion, and longing had been channeled into that single moment. It felt familiar, and yet it felt like the beginning of something dangerous. The price. Of passion, the night unfolded as a storm of emotions. What had begun as a desperate attempt to relive the past became something far more complicated. Passion, regret, and unspoken truths tangled between them, creating a storm neither of them could control. As dawn broke and the light poured into the apartment, Liana sat alone, her mind racing. She had betrayed herself. She had betrayed her resolve. The momentary escape had been fleeting, but the consequences were already beginning to weigh on her. Rian, too, was lost in the aftermath.